In my business, we have kind of the built-in perfect goal, and that is the highest peak in the world, a peak called Mount Everest. Has anybody here climbed to the summit of Mount Everest? I've actually had the pleasure of guiding Mount Everest on 3 different occasions, and it is a pretty spectacular place to go to. The last foot or so to the summit provides you with a view that is really life-changing. From the top of Everest, you could see about 3,000 miles. And when you could see that far, you could literally see that the earth is curved. Literally, the horizon is just a bent line. And against that curved surface of the earth, you see at first a chalky layer of atmosphere. You know, it has dust and moisture and other stuff in it. And above that, it becomes a little bit darker blue. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, when I looked straight up in the sky was violet, and I could see stars twinkling in the sky. And I thought that was a pretty spectacular experience to have. Well, Everest was, a oft attempted but rarely climbed mountain for about 100 years. We had expedition after expedition to go there, and nobody got to the top. In fact, there was 10 expeditions had traveled to Mount Everest before the first team made it to the summit. And during those 10 expeditions, 16 people died trying. It was finally in 1953 that a guy named Edmund Hillary, in partnership with a Sherpa named Tenzing Norgay, finally got to the top. Now, when they got to the top, it really opened a floodgates. Everybody else wanted to have the same experience. For the British, who organized this expedition, it was a sign of great national pride and success for them, especially coming out of World War II. And then the Germans tried, and eventually the Americans tried, and team after team after team tried. And in about the mid-1990s, commercial guides like myself decided, well, why don't we charge your average dentist or lawyer about $65,000 and see if we can get them to the top of the mountain. And we actually, they did a pretty good job. Has anyone here ever read Into Thin Air, the book about that disaster? So you remember that story, right? So back then, what they realized was the best way to get unqualified people to the summit of Mount Everest was to add more and more infrastructure. So by the time I was guiding Everest, we would bring 30,000 feet of rope with us. We'd string it from the bottom all the way to the top. We would bring 42,000 pounds of equipment to base camp. If we were walking in from the south side, we would have over 1,000 people employed just carrying equipment. If we drove from the north side, we would have trucks after trucks after trucks driving on these dusty roads across Tibet to get us to base camp. But with all of those tools in place, we got better and better at getting people to the top. So we were excellent at reaching our goals just by employing more and more tools. In fact, the best tool that we employ up there is not the ropes or the warm clothes, it's bottled oxygen. If you use bottled oxygen, you actually reduce the summit height from 29,000 feet down to 26,000 feet. You make the mountain 3,000 feet shorter. And if people are really starting to struggle up there, the best thing you do is just up the flow rate of oxygen. So when I first started guiding Everest, you'd be lucky if you got 2 bottles of oxygen to get you to the top. Now they might use 5, 6, or 7 bottles of oxygen to get somebody to the top. So we're able to get less and less qualified people to achieve their lifelong dream. Well, we got really good in the mid-90s into the early 2000s in getting people to the top, but we just weren't very good at getting them all back down again, which caused a little problem in our business. And so when you go to the summit of Mount Everest on the north side, you actually step over around 7 dead bodies on your way to the top. And the interesting thing about those 7 people is they all died on their way back down from the summit. Nobody on their way to the summit suddenly gets hit in the head with a rock and gets knocked over and killed. No, what happens is they push themselves to the summit, and somewhere on the way back down, they sit down and they die. What happens is, whether it's because of cerebral edema or because of some other thing, they are so exhausted they're unable to continue to climb back towards safety. And at 40 below zero, if you sit down and for some reason go unconscious, you will literally freeze solid within 6 hours. Now, some people, like this guy here, he laid down to die. But there's actually a guy called the Waving Man. When you're going to the summit, he sat down on a rock on his way back down from the top. His legs froze first, his arms froze, and it wasn't for a while afterwards that his core froze and he was finally dead. But he's literally sitting on a rock with his hands in the air. So as you're going to the top, he's waving you on, and when you're coming back down, he's high-fiving you for having been successful. So the crazy thing is that, as I said, everyone dies on the way down. Nobody dies in a dramatic way. They all die because of a human error. They all made a mistake, and that's what ends up killing them. Well, we as guides got together in the early 2000s and said, you know what? It's not good for business if people get to the top but die on their way back down, right? So there's no repeat business in this. We have to figure out a new system so we can get people not just to the top but to the bottom. So we just went through a process just like you would in your business. We hired consultants. We looked at the way we were doing things. We modified our techniques. You know, we didn't exactly do ISO 9000 or SWOT analysis or something like that, but we came up with a couple of changes to make it even safer to get people to the top and have them have the energy to get back down. So after we had the tools already, we looked at our techniques, and we started driving crazy results on Mount Everest. In fact, when this picture was taken in 2001, this was the record summit day on Everest up at that point. Some point that day, when I took this picture, there was the 2,000th person reached the top of Mount Everest. On that day alone, 89 people reached the top. So we became excellent at getting people to the top, and we even became great at getting people back down. We have a statistic in mountaineering. It's called the death-to-summit ratio. How many people summit versus how many people die? Well, we've gotten the death-to-summit ratio on Everest down to about 1.8%. So it's a pretty safe place to be. The only problem is when we made it easier and easier, we just started to increase the numbers of people going to the top. It changed Everest from being this iconic goal, like a true symbol of the fact that you were a skilled and talented climber, into being something where if you were some kind of an arrogant egomaniac with $65,000 and a warm down jacket, we too could get you to the summit of the mountain. And so look at this picture. It quickly became the cover story for an article called The Everest Mess. Now, if you're a climber, or if you're anybody who's pursuing goals, and you find out that the goal that you have spent all these years of your life pursuing has become, kind of gotten a dirty name, maybe it's time to look elsewhere for a challenge. And so for me, it became obvious that I had to retire from working on Everest and move over to a peak that was a little bit more challenging, that had a little bit more of what I consider the important aspects of mountaineering spirit involved with it. And to me, that peak was a peak called K2. Anybody here ever climbed K2? Well, this is a notoriously difficult mountain. Does anybody know anything about K2? You know, the death-to-ratio summit is a lot greater than on Everest. Remember, at Everest, it's 1.8%. On K2, it's 35%. On Everest right now, there's been 6,000 people who have reached the summit. In the history of climbing K2, there's only been 305 people who've ever made the top. Tomorrow or the next day, a group of people are going to make an attempt to go to the summit. They're at the highest camp right now. I just read it on the internet. If they make it to the top, it'll be the first time in 3 years that anyone's been on the summit of K2. People have been trying for the last couple of years, but they're pushed back time and time again. Now, as a climber, when you start reading through the books of climbing Everest and the books about climbing K2, you really pick on a much different theme, right? Everest is possible, K2 is improbable, if not impossible. So if you're going to go there, you want to go there with a team that you think is going to increase not just your chance of success of getting to the top, but also your chance of success of getting back down, right, to make it back home. So in 2002, I was offered an invitation by this guy to join his team to go to K2. Now, this man had led 35 expeditions to places like Mount Everest. He finally thought he had the skill to lead a team to K2, and he thought that the best plan was to put together the absolute best climbers in the world into one team and lead that team hopefully to the summit. Now, that makes good sense, doesn't it? Would you think if you got a chance to be on the all-star team, you'd jump at the chance? Well, there was 12 climbers, all of them people I'd read about for years, all of them with amazing reputations. And I joined this team, and we traveled to Pakistan, and K2's in Pakistan. We had to then travel for 4 days on these roads through the Karakoram Highway, and then you walk for 8 days to base camp. So we had been with each other for 2 weeks before we ever even got to the bottom of the mountain, and we had been fighting for probably 11 of those 12 days. When we got to the bottom of the mountain, we were a team of 12 of the greatest climbers in the world, but to me it appeared we had 11 of the biggest prima donnas and myself over there. We couldn't have organized a picnic in Central Park, never mind an attempt on K2. But we went to work every day. We just didn't accomplish anything. So maybe it sounds like some organizations you guys have been involved with before, right? So we did have the dream team, but as I said, it was a nightmare. The nightmare for me came to a gigantic conclusion on my birthday. So it's my birthday. We walk to the bottom of the mountain. There's 9 of us. So myself and 8 other amazing climbers. And at the base of the mountain, you strap crampons, these spikes to the bottoms of your boots. And we're sitting down on our butts, strapping these crampons on, and suddenly somebody started to scream. And he was pointing up, and we looked, and through the clouds came this body. This poor guy had been somehow disconnected himself from a climbing rope 5,000 feet above our heads. His body was just coming flying through the air, and that's what this person saw. From the first time it hit the slope, there's a gigantic explosion of red. He bounced about another 1,000 feet, another explosion of red, and his body eventually came to a rest 500 feet away from us. Now, I'm with, 8 of the best climbers in the world, and of the 9 of us, only 2 of us had the courage to go to his body. Now, we knew he was dead. There was no way he could have survived, that kind of fall. The trauma was so outrageous. When I saw his body, I actually couldn't even touch it. His whole back of his head had been completely squished in, and that was what was leaving the splashes of blood every time he hit. And when his back of his head was crushed in, but nothing at all had happened to the front of his face, it seemed as if his eyes and nose and everything were in the wrong place. But the worst was that his lower body had been completely destroyed. And so his legs were tucked up underneath his body. And we had to somehow package this man up. And we had to lower him down. And we knew we had to do it before his teammates came onto the scene, because the way he looked, you knew that they would have nightmares the rest of their lives if they knew how grotesquely brutal his death was. So myself and the other guy, we reached into our backpacks and pulled out some down jackets and some other equipment to try to make a stretcher or some way to lower him down. And I had to go underneath his shoulders and lift him up in the air so we could put the stretcher underneath him. And then as I lowered him back down, I literally was covered with pieces of his brain and blood poured all over me. And we eventually wrapped him up in some ropes, and we lowered him back down to where the other 7 guys had been waiting for about an hour for us to finish this work. We then wrapped him inside some tents. We put him into this little mummy type shape that you guys see him here in. And at that point, all the work that we could do was done. We physically could not carry him the 2 miles back to base camp. We had to wait for about 35 other people to get there to move this body. So we're just standing there with nothing to do. And in that second, I felt like I was being stabbed 1,000 times in my gut. I literally bent over crying. And here I am in front of 8 of the greatest climbers in the world, and I just start sobbing. I'm like, it's my birthday, and I'm going home. And so I literally just went back to base camp, packed up, and just started walking back towards my house, which was 2 weeks away from where I was. And when you walk that 8 days back to the nearest village in K2, you walk across terrain like this. It's just covered in rock. So all you do is you kick rock after rock, and you're constantly feeling sorry for yourself. But I did pledge that if I had an opportunity, I would come back to K2. Now, that year on K2, 2 people died. That one man that you saw fall, and another man who was killed in a gigantic avalanche. So when you die on K2, you die in dramatic fashion, unlike on Everest. Remember on Everest, you sit down, you fall asleep, and you die. On K2, the mountain just repels you. So it threw the first guy off. It killed another guy in an avalanche. It's rare that we find your body on K2. So for your family, there's very little closure. It's not like we're going to be able to take your body down. Like, very few people fall to within 500 feet of where 9 people are standing, right? So if we don't have your body, the only way that we could create some memorial to you is we've created this rock here called the Gilkey Memorial, and we take the plate that you've been eating off of for the last couple of months, and we literally scrape the mashed potatoes and gravy away, and we take a hammer and a nail, and we chisel your name into that plate, and we put those plates on that rock. When I got there that season, there were 63 plates. When I left, there were 65 plates. The next year, nobody, and actually that year, 2002, nobody summited. Of the 12 climbers I was with that year, 12 of the best climbers in the world, 6 of them are now dead. In 2003, nobody summited. 2004, there was a bunch of summits. Sadly, I couldn't be there. In 2005, I had my second opportunity to come to K2. This time, I decided I was going to, the most important thing was to know the person I was going to climb with as well as I would know anybody. So I came with a friend of mine, and we had been climbing together for over 20 years. I knew that I had to be with somebody I could trust. Unlike the first time, you know, what was obvious to me is that if I was in need, these people would have never been there for me. I needed to be up there with somebody. If I sprained my ankle or, you know, broke a toenail, he would be there with me and help me get back down again. So I came with one guy. His name was Dow Franken. We were on the mountain with lots of other groups. There was a Chinese group. There was a Japanese group, Bulgarians, Polish climbers all over the world. And we tried our best to get to the summit, but we were stopped by giant snowstorms on 2 different occasions. Now, a K2 expedition is not something that takes a weekend. This was 2 months of our life, right, that we were up there. Finally, after being defeated 2 different times at about 25,000 feet, we walked off the mountain. I had lost 35 pounds, and shortly after this picture was taken, I walked behind this building and started to pee blood. I felt like I had given everything I had to try to climb K2, and once again, I had been defeated. Walked back home, did that nasty walk, kicked a lot of stones, feeling sorry for myself. And in 2007, I had another opportunity to return to K2. This time, we get to base camp. We're the first team there. The mountain is telling us to go home. Giant avalanches come flying down. When you're at base camp, there is no protection. So it's not like it's a secure place to be. You're literally camping on a section of ice that's 5,000 feet thick. So you have a mile of ice underneath you. That ice is constantly moving down the mountain. You're just slowly drifting along on this river of ice. And from above, these avalanches are coming down and dusting your camp every single day. This time in 2007, I came with a guy who was, his name is Don Bowie. He's a Canadian, and he is a mountain rescue expert. So he's a paramedic, perfect guy if you break your leg up there to have on your team because he's going to be able to get you back down. We also had with us a guy named Bruce Normand, who's a very famous climber. He's a Scottish guy, and he is the smartest person I know. He has a PhD from MIT in theoretical physics. He teaches in Beijing, and he speaks 9 languages, all the easy ones like Korean, Czech, Russian, Japanese, and he speaks English with a Scottish accent, so I don't understand a thing he says. But anyway, this is our climbing team. In base camp, we had a guy named Joel Shalowitz, who's going to be our base camp manager, who's collecting weather reports, sending communications back up and down the mountain to us via radio. Here's our base camp, that little red dot. So from here, we have an 11,000-foot climb to go. And when you climb that high, you can't go there in one day. So you have to place a Camp 1. You have to stock that with equipment. And then you take some of that equipment to Camp 2 and so on. So from base camp to Camp 1, we're going to carry about 1,500 pounds of equipment to get there. Now, there's 3 guys. You do the math. That's a lot of trips. You're going back and forth, day after day after day. And then when you have Camp 1 established, you could now start working on Camp 2, and then Camp 3, and eventually Camp 4. It's a brutally hard work. It's going to take months to prepare the mountain before we can make a summit bid. Well, we would have to go to work no matter the weather. So if it's snowing out, if it's blowing wind, it doesn't matter. Gear has to be moved. You have to go to work. So it might be 20 below zero. It might be 60-mile-an-hour winds. It didn't matter. We'd stay up on the mountain for 6, 7, 8 days. We'd stay up until we ran out of food. I don't know if you guys have ever had a stale bread and goose sandwich, but this is not the quite, the great dessert or, dinner that you need to propel your body through this. So we would stay up there until we were so exhausted. We'd come back off the mountain, and then we'd go back up again. Well, after 6 weeks, we'd eventually established a camp at 25,000 feet. And from that camp, we needed to put one more camp, and then we could go to the summit. So we were at least 2 days away from the top. And when we left that camp to start to climb towards this higher camp, the snow was so deep we physically couldn't make it there. The snow is past waist deep, and so as we climbed, which we tried, we could only make about 100 feet an hour. And at that altitude, with 4,000 feet to go, it was impossible to get to the summit. We had failed after 6 weeks on the mountain, so we descend all the way back to base camp. Now, we're not the only team on the mountain who's trying to get to the top. There's a strong Korean team, which has 10 climbers and 5 high-altitude Sherpas that they've imported from Nepal. They have a strong Russian team, which is 8 of the biggest dudes I've ever seen. They're about 6'4", 240 pounds. They look at the front line of an NFL team. They had this one guy named Roman who was so hardcore that at 34 years old, he had every single tooth pulled from his head, replaced with these golden bridges. And he looked like that Jaws character from the old James Bond movie. Luckily for us, he never had a reason to smile, right? So you didn't see it very often. There was a strong Portuguese team. There was an Italian team. There was a lone Iranian climber. There's also, on another route, there was a Czech group and then a Russian group around the corner of the mountain. Well, all of us got together in base camp and had a meeting. We all had failed on the mountain. There was no way that any of us were going to get to the top if we continue with our current strategy. And the current strategy was compete. Compete against the Russians. Compete against the Koreans. You'd be so much more glorious if your team was the only team to get to the top. But it was obvious to us at this point that competing against each other was going to lead to everybody's failure. So we sat down with all the teams, the Czech team, the Korean team, the Russian team, right? And we had the only guy who spoke all those languages on our team, Bruce, right? So we get them all together, and we come up with a strategy where if we cooperate with each other, we'll be able to all hopefully go to the summit together. At least we could make the same summit bid. And we know that the way K2 works, you might start out with 25 people leaving base camp, but it's hard work to get to Camp 1. So maybe 23 or 22 people will make it there. The others will be so exhausted they'll turn around and go back. And then of those 22 people, maybe 18 will make it to Camp 2, 10 to Camp 3, and so on. So maybe if we all cooperate, we only will get 2 or 3 people to the summit. Chances are you won't be amongst those 2 or 3 people, but you still made the sacrifice to get them to the top. Does everybody agree on this? Sitting around there, everyone says, yeah, it's a great plan. We'll totally cooperate with you guys. So the plan is the next morning we're going to leave to go to Camp 1 together. If 25 of us leave together, making the trail through the snow and such, we should be able to make it. Well, it doesn't work out that way. The next day is kind of stormy, and every other team rolled over and went to bed, and we were the only team moving up the mountain. So here we are heading back up the mountain.
Step on the beast.
Here we go, is it first step? Pretty nice up there, huh?
Yeah. Well, here we are back on our way up K2. We're below Camp 1. And sure enough, it's snowing and blowing on us again. This mountain loves to torture us. Certainly never given us the easy way out. Beautiful Camp 1 again. God.
We got up this morning, and when we looked up onto the Black Pyramid towards Camp 2, there was just a number of clouds ripping across the face. We were alone, there was no one else with us, and so we kind of talked to each other, and we all decided, let's just go for it.
This is the funnel right here. This is probably the worst place to be in conditions like this. I can only go through this section one at a time. It's just too dangerous. It's definitely the coldest, hardest day so far, going up to Camp 3.
22,000 feet, and the weather's just not cooperating at all. Don is doing a great job of breaking trail for us. Days like this really fill you with doubt. Snow conditions are just horrendous, and looked like the wind died about an hour and a half ago. It's one of those days when you wish you took up golf instead of mountaineering. All right, we'll just find Camp 3 somehow, and then probably 4 hours before we're ready to roll in our sleeping bags over.
We're at Camp 3. I'll tell you, it took us about 2.5 hours to ascend that last 100 meters or so. Without exaggeration, you couldn't touch bottom. But we did get here. We were all comfortable. We're boiling water, and we'll head for Camp 4 tomorrow.
Well, you guys, we're back up at Camp 3, the same place where we've already failed, and we're alone, which is obviously horribly disappointing to us. If you ever get a chance to see the Italian version of this TV show, they have a great scene where they're in the tents at Camp 1 and they're screaming over the radios to the guy in base camp saying, "It's impossible, you can't go anywhere, the weather's too bad." And the guy in base camp goes, "Yes, but the Americans have just made Camp 3. So, well, here we are again at 25,000 feet, waist past snow deep. And we are so determined to get to the summit that even though we know it's futile, we're going to go tomorrow, we're going to try to make our best attempt at it. So we pack up all of our stuff, we climb out of the tent, we start working through this deep snow, and we've now climbed above the storm. So you guys have all been in, jets before we climb out of the clouds. Well, we're now above the storm. It's beautiful up there. It's below freezing, but the wind isn't blowing very hard, and we're able to walk up in the sun, and we go about 100 feet an hour or so. So after 6 or 7 hours, we're only 600 or 700 feet above where we left, the tents. And people start arriving now at Camp 3. They've climbed from Camp 2 up to Camp 3, and they see us above them, and they're getting worried, right? If they don't get on the train with the Americans, they're never going to make the top. So 2 climbers break away and climb up to us. It's these 2 Portuguese climbers. Now, this guy in the front is one of the greatest climbers in the history of mountaineering. He's summited all of the big peaks in the world, and he climbs up to us. He's been following in our footsteps now for about 8,000 feet. And he climbs up to us and says, "Come on, you guys, you have to go faster. You're going too slow. You're not making any progress today." We're like, "Well, why don't you try to make the trail?" And he goes out in front of us for 10 feet and turns around and says, "This is impossible. We have to camp here." And we agree with him. He's right, actually. So we put up a tent 500 feet away from where everybody else is. We spend the night in there. The next morning, following in our footsteps, the Russians catch up. The Koreans catch up. The Italians catch up. And now together, finally, the whole bunch of us is able to force the route. We're able to break trail and get us up to the site of Camp 4. So Camp 4 is at 26,000 feet. This is the place where climbers call the death zone. This is 8,000 meters. Above this point, there's so little oxygen, roughly 33% of what there is at sea level. You guys understand the impact that can have on your brain. Clearly, the biggest problem is without fueling the frontal lobe of your brain, you're not doing a very good job at thinking right now. So everybody's critical thinking skills are limited. Certainly all their motor skills are limited. But we have to get to this place. We have to build a camp to get ourselves fed, and everything else prepared, because tomorrow morning we have to start climbing to the summit. And the climb to the summit from here is an additional 2,500 vertical feet. The average climbing team will take 22 hours to go from this camp to the summit back to this camp. So we crawl into our tents. We have to melt snow for water. We try to feed ourselves something, but we are so nauseous we could barely eat. And at around 11:30 at night, the alarm goes off, and we have to start leaving for the summit. Now, we had a plan that we had identified first in base camp that we had shared with some of the teams, that the best way to split the chores up to go, actually, let me go back. The best way to split the chores up was to have the Korean team, which had 5 of these high-altitude Sherpas, including a guy who had been 6 times to the summit of Mount Everest. They were all using bottled oxygen. They were going to leave an hour before everybody else, and they were going to put the ropes up the first 1,000 feet of the climb. Okay? So they're going to go up. There's a thin gully of snow they're going to climb up. And then the route gets really steep after 1,000 feet. In fact, it's so steep that your greatest chance of dying is on the next section. If you make a mistake with the ropes, if you mistie a knot, if you don't put the anchors in the right place, this is the place where you're going to die. We are going to fix that second 1,000 feet of rope. The Koreans will take us to the beginning of the danger zone. We'll take the rope through the danger zone. There's only 3 of us. We're not using bottled oxygen, but we certainly are fiercely determined, and we believe that if you're going to get the reward of going to the summit of K2, you have to assume the risk of going to K2. Then the third and last section of the climb to the top is going to be handled by the Russian team. 4 of these incredibly strong Russians using bottled oxygen have made it to the highest camp. They'll take the last 1,000 feet of rope and bring that to the top. Now, there's a Portuguese team. There's an Iranian climber, a single Iranian climber. There's an Italian team. We go to them and say, guess what, you guys? You get to stay in bed and sleep in. The best thing you could do for everybody is wait until we go first. Let us put the footsteps in. Let us put the ropes in. And then you could follow our carefully manicured route to the summit. And they, of course, think this is the greatest idea ever. They're very anxious to not risk their lives to go to the summit. They want to picture themselves on the top, but they just don't want to have to earn it the way that we're willing to earn it. So that's the plan when we go to bed. Here's our the first section of going to the summit.
Okay, you have a good trip. Over. I don't know if you can see anything up there. A couple of lights. They're in the bottleneck. Don, some Koreans, some Russians. He said that the Koreans, it seemed, were going to head out at 11 and that they were going to head out at 12, but it sounded like everybody's backed up, so they're about an hour and 20 behind where they thought they were, but it sounds like they're rearing to go. So the night and the summit push has begun. Been pretty dramatic so far. The Korean team was ahead of us. They were on oxygen, and one of their Sherpas fell down the south face to his death. And I don't think we'll ever find his body. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens.
So just about dawn, this first rays of light were hitting the slope. It was actually minutes before this picture was taken. The Korean team was out front. And their guide, a guy named Nimanuru Sherpa, he'd been 6 times to the summit of Mount Everest. He was being paid $25 a day to guide these guys to the summit of K2. He had a wife and 3 children back at home in Kathmandu, which is the 5th poorest country in the world. $25 a day is a lot of money. In fact, the average annual salary is $200 a year. So one week he was going to make more than a year's salary, and he was going to be on this expedition for 9 or 10 weeks. It seemed like a good deal, I'm sure, when he left home. Well, he was up on the mountain. He was, managing the team of Sherpas that were fixing this rope the first 1,000 feet. It wasn't very steep. I mean, you could see in this picture, it doesn't get steep until later. Well, he decides he doesn't need to clip into the rope. The rules don't apply to him, right? So he just starts climbing up in the soft snow next to the rope, which is already anchored in place, and his feet give out, and he just loses control. He's unable to stop himself, and he goes rocketing off the side of the mountain. He literally comes straight down down this giant face. They never found his body. In that moment, everybody is panicked. On summit days on K2, the statistics are for every 7 climbers, 1 person will die on summit day. There is now about 20 of us trying to go to the top. We've seen 1 person die already. Statistically, 2 more of us will be dead by the end of the day. And everybody's asking himself that question, is it going to be me? Am I next? Well, before I could even process that question, I hear yelling above me, and I realize that the Sherpa team that's fixing the rope is so distraught at having lost their friend's life that the guy at the top of the rope, the person in the greatest amount of risk, can't remember how to tie the knot into the anchor, and he's crying for help. So I leave where everybody else is, and I start climbing up, first in the trail made by the Sherpas, get all the way up to this guy, anchor the rope into place, and then start to let him go back down. And I get on the radio to my two friends, Bruce and Don. I say, guess what, you guys? I want to keep going. What do you think? And they're like, yeah, it's the perfect day. And it really was. There was not a cloud in the sky. And having spent 9 months of my life on K2, this is the best day I had ever seen on the mountain. It's like if there's going to be any day that we could make it happen, it was today. But we still needed a lot of stuff. We needed a lot of rope and anchors to make this happen. We had to put out 3,000 feet of rope, and the only amount of rope that had been laid out so far was about 600 feet. I had 600 feet in my pack, so I take that rope out, I string it out, and I start to lay the next 600 feet of rope out, and it takes us all the way up to the most dangerous part of the mountain, that traverse. When I get there, I'm out of rope. I call down to my friends. I'm like, you know what? It's time for the big guns. You remember that Russian dude with the golden teeth named Roman? Send him up now. Send Roman now. So they get the Roman, or they get the Russian. They give him some rope. He climbs up to me, and then he's able to start to climb across the steepest section. So here's the second section of going to the summit.
Base camp, copy, over.
The slope that they're on right now, you know, the famed 45 or 55 or 65 degree bottleneck traverse slope, is in fact freaking steep. And you can see it from here, and Chris is on it right now, or at the black base of it anyways.
Unbelievable. Considering how hard we've been working, this is a big mountain.
Hey, base camp, can you read me? Over.
Yes, loud and clear, Chris.
Okay, we're turning the corner on the traverse.
Yeah, we got another maybe 350 to go.
Here comes Don, the summit of K2. Awesome job, Don.
The whole base camp, you hear just applause erupting in every different camp, and we're all so excited for you. Over.
Very, very hard summit in these conditions. We either had knee-deep snow or foolproof ice.
Oh, that's one of the hardest summits I've ever had.
Oh, yeah?
I think I only specialize in hard ones.
We let that one, so that's 15 and a half hours for the summit. I think I just pray that we can make it back safely. There's a long way before we have to fix lines. Over.
Now, I've been a mountain guide for 27 years, and every single mountain I've ever climbed, the technique as a guide is always the same. You need to be the last one leaving the summit. You want all the problems to be below you. If somebody's suffering and they're below you, you can climb down to them in a matter of seconds or minutes. If somebody has a problem 100 feet away from you, above your head on one of these giant peaks, it could take you an hour to get there. That's how slow you go. Well, we were on the summit of K2 at 4:30 in the afternoon. This is horribly late. We've already been 15 and a half hours of climbing. The people on bottled oxygen have already run out of oxygen. This is a disaster waiting to happen. When we guide Mount Everest, we tell people if you're on the top by 10:30 in the morning, you have to turn around. Not only do you want oxygen reserves to get you down, you also want the warmth of the sun to keep you from getting frostbite. And you need the sunlight to find your way home, right? Well, at 4:30, we know we only have about 2 hours left of sunlight. The temperature will drop dramatically in just a short amount of time. Well, on the top with us is actually our 13 other people. 16 of us have made it to the top. The Koreans, actually some of the Koreans and some of the Sherpas made it to the summit. 5 of their team out of 15 that started, 5 of them make it to the top. They turn around and go back down after taking a couple of pictures. 4 of the Russians have made it to the top. They take some pictures and go back down. The Portuguese climber gets his picture taken. He runs down. And standing with us on the summit still is a guy named Daniele Nardi, leader of the Italian team. He has left high camp with 4 climbers. They left at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he is the leader of their expedition, but he has not seen or heard from anybody on his team in about 13 hours. Daniele, where's your partners? Oh, I don't know. They're not as strong as I am. Take my picture. Film me for Italian television, right? So I take his picture. I film him for Italian television. Do you know if they're okay? Oh, I don't know, Chris. You know, they're just not as strong as I am. Take my picture. Take my picture. And then he starts heading down. We also have up there a lone Czechoslovakian climber, a lone Czech. He's come up with 5 guys. They've left their highest camp. 4 of them have turned around because they're so exhausted, and he alone goes to the summit. He's following in our footsteps, and when he gets to the top, he leans over to Bruce in the green jacket, and he says to him, I am Libor from Czech Expedition. I'm very weak. You have to help me down. Now, he's not the only person who's very weak up there. The lone Iranian climber is also on the summit. He is completely exhausted. We can't leave these men behind or they will definitely die. So we get them to go in front of us down the ropes. So it's the Iranian, it's the Czech, it's Don, it's myself and Bruce. We start to head towards the ropes from the summit. We're walking into the shadow of K2. So the temperature is dropping down. It's gone from maybe plus 20 to minus 20 in about 40 minutes. And as we're descending, we run into 2 Italians still going up. So this is from Italian television. This is one of the guys, Stefano Zafka. This is him at 9 o'clock in the morning. Shouldn't he turn around at 9 o'clock in the morning? He continues to go to the summit. This is the guys in base camp. They're finding out that Daniele Nardi has just made the summit. So their leader has made the top. They're so excited their expedition's a success. Here's the video that we took of Daniele walking across the top. He walks off the top, he starts heading down, he walks past his teammates and never says a word to them. The guys in base camp are like, where's Mario? Where's Stefano? Where's the rest of the team?
Mario, campo base, basso. Mario, campo base, basso.
Is there been any sights on Mario? Over. Yes, we've seen Mario. He's behind us, but they happen. Daniele is the only person who doesn't seem to be concerned about him.
Non ho capito bene, però.
Located.
They find out where they are by our base camp manager calling us. So we give them the first clue that 2 Italians are still going to the summit.
You are with Mario?
Yes.
Where?
Mario's going to the summit.
He's going to the summit? You are... How many times?
Maybe 1 hour. Stefano's with him.
Stefano è con Mario.
Even if he's close to the top, it's not too late. That becomes dangerous.
Yes. Really dangerous.
Mario, campo base, basso.
Ti sentiamo, dove sei, Passo?
Sono il Delta campo 2.
So Mario and Stefano have reached the summit. They're calling down to the guys in base camp.
Mario, sei un adorabile pazzo, è tardissimo.
As you can see, they're not celebrating this success.
Sì, Vito Vineggia che sta sul Zamka.
C'è Claudio che è scoppiato a piangere, Passo. Me lo fai morire questo ragazzo qua, Mario, Passo.
We're about 2 hours ahead of these guys descending the ropes. When we get to the bottom of the fixed line, we now have about 1,000-foot walk across a relatively flat part of the mountain. And as we get to that section where it goes from steep to flat, there laying in the snow is the Czech climber. He's unable to stand up. He certainly can't walk. We roll him over, and all he can say is, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. Well, we're like, dude, you're not dying on our watch. If we could bring you to your high camp, we would. We don't even know where your camp is because they've come up a slightly different way. So we're going to take you back to our camp. We have a 3-person tent. There'll be 4 of us in it. We have 3 sleeping bags. We'll make it work. So we put him over our shoulders, and we literally start to drag him back to this camp. It takes us about an hour and a half to get there, to go 1,000 feet. When we get him there, we have to each climb into the tent. Now, when you climb into a tent, you can't just, barrel in there like you would into the door of your house. You have these crampons on your feet that would destroy all the down clothing, everything else. You got to snap off the crampons. It's so cold that in the process of taking these straps off your feet, your hands will freeze. So on average, it takes 10 minutes for one person to get inside the tent. We send in Don first. Don, you're the paramedic. We have a big medical kit there. You start to treat Libor, the Czech climber. Don climbs in first. 10 minutes later, we can now unstrap the crampons from Libor's feet. We can slide him into the tent. He has no sleeping bag there, so I give up my sleeping bag so we could put him in a sleeping bag. We have to treat him for hypothermia. We have to treat him for the swelling of his brain called cerebral edema that you get those altitudes. We don't know what else is shutting down on him. Bruce climbs in. I have a half an hour of standing around between when we get to the tent before I can go in. So I go over to the Russians. Hey, Russians, how you guys doing? Oh, we're doing great, Chris. This is a great climb, a great day for Russia. I go to the Koreans. They're ecstatic at their success. They seem a little bit ambivalent about the fact that they lost somebody's life, but they've been successful. I go over to the Italian tent. Daniele, what the heck is going on with your team? Oh, Chris, I don't know. They're so weak. They're so slow. They don't talk to me on the radio. But I have made the summit. I'm like, listen, dude, we have to worry about whether your guys will make it back down again. And looking up on the mountain, we could see their 2 lights together. It's 9:30 at night. They are definitely no more than 3 hours away. So Daniele, if they're not back by 12:30, come and get me. I'm only sleeping 6 feet away from you through a thin nylon wall tent. Just holler at 12:30 and I will come out and we will start a rescue for these guys. That is a great plan, Chris. I go into the tent, I take off my crampons. When we get our crampons off, we stack them one on top of each other inside the front of the tent. We have this thing that's like a garage called a vestibule. So there's 1 pair of crampons that's Don, there's Libor's, there's Bruce's, and mine. 4 of them stacked on top of each other. We go to sleep. At about 11:30, I hear Daniele talking. He's on the radio. He's talking to Mario, one of the 2 climbers that are still on the hill. Mario is asking him for directions on how to get back to camp. We know at this point that they're on the shoulder. They are minutes away from being in camp. There should be no reason for us to worry at all. But for some reason, Mario doesn't come back to the tent until 1 o'clock in the morning. When he crawls into the tent, Daniele asks him, where is Stefano? Where's your climbing partner? Oh, I don't know. He's 5 minutes behind me. Why don't you just roll over and go to bed? Stefano will be here in a minute. So Daniele rolls over and goes back to sleep. Mario falls asleep. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Daniele wakes up. Stefano is still not there. Mario, you have to go outside the tent and go find him. Mario goes outside, but he can't even find the tracks in the snow anymore. The snow has started to blow. We have a blizzard that's moving on to K2, and he can't find the tracks. He doesn't see Stefano's light on his headlamp burning in the darkness. He doesn't say anything to anybody. He crawls back into the tent and goes back to sleep. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the radios are abuzz. The guys in base camp are in a full-on blizzard. They can't even see 100 feet from tent to tent. Up high on the mountain, we could see maybe 10 feet. That's how low visibility is. The Portuguese climber gets up. We gotta go, we gotta go. He grabs the Koreans and the Russians, and those 3 teams race off the side of the mountain. They're trying to find their way back to Camp 3 through the deep snow, then to Camp 2. They get back to base camp by dinner time. 3 remaining Italians wake up. They're 15 minutes behind the Portuguese team, guys. As they're descending, the track has already been filled over with snow. They can't find where to go. They come back, and they're standing outside of our tent yelling at us, wake up, you gotta go. Like, listen, dude, we're awake. We're dealing with this whacked-out Czech dude who's suffering from massive anxiety attacks. I don't know if you could see his pupils, but they're practically non-existent, right? He's seeing God at this moment, and we're trying to get him dressed and bring him back down alive. They're like, if you don't leave right now, you will die. And we're like, listen, we have a little bit of time. We'll make this happen. They go, no, you don't understand. You will die just like Stefano. At 8:30 in the morning, we find out for the first time that Stefano Zafka never returned to the camp. Looking outside the tent with visibility at 10 feet, you realize there's no way that you could find this man in this blizzard. If you go up the mountain to look for him, you are likely to die. And there'll be no way that we could, even afford to lose anybody's life. Our job now is to get this guy, Libor, back down to his family, as well as to get ourselves back down. And we also have to help the 3 Italians who can't find their own way down. And guess what? The lone Iranian climber is still up there. He has no clue where to go. So we have to help these people come off the mountain. We start dressing as fast as we can. You get dressed, you put on your down jackets, you get your goggles on, your hood's up, the whole thing, and you reach outside the tent for your pair of crampons so you can strap them to your feet. When we went to bed, there was 4 pair of crampons. When we woke up in the morning, only 3 pairs of crampons were there. Somebody from another team didn't have the same discipline as us. Their crampons are buried in this fresh snow that fell, and instead of looking for their own crampons, they reached under the fly of our tent and stole our top pair of crampons. So one of us is going to have to descend the mountain without crampons. Now, this is not a death sentence unless you hit a patch of ice. So here we are descending off the side of the mountain. We know that Stefano Zacca, if he's out there at all, he is probably dead. He's probably just like the guys on Everest who sit down and freeze to death. So he's probably long since become, an icicle. We start to descend the mountain, and as we get towards Camp 3, Don, who has chosen not to use or to go without crampons, suddenly hits a patch of ice. His feet go shooting out from him. By a miracle, he tumbles and hits the tents at Camp 3. But he hears a snapping noise as he's falling, and he thinks that he's broken his leg. So here we are in a blizzard at 25,500 feet. We're trying to get a man with a broken leg down. We're trying to get the whacked out Czech dude down. We're trying to help the Italians and the Iranian. We know at this point we have to split the team up. I will stay at Camp 3 with the Czech climber. He's incapable of going down anymore. Bruce, you take Don. The Italians and the Iranian will help you get the man with the broken leg back down to the next camp. They all leave together. Listen, Don, you have a broken leg. Don't carry any gear. Leave your sleeping bag here at Camp 3. I'll take it down. Remember, at Camp 2, we have a tent set up. We have an extra sleeping bag there. We have food. We have stoves, all the safety equipment we'll ever need. Climb down with nothing on your back. They start to descend. Well, the Italians and the Iranian are a little impatient. It's the guy with a broken leg is going pretty slow, right? This is a huge inconvenience to them, and so they just take off. They get to Camp 2 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Iranian is too tired to set his tent up. The Italians had left a tent at Camp 2, but somebody had left the door wide open, so the wind has filled their tent with snow. But they see this perfectly secured tent with a sleeping bag, a stove, food, everything they possibly need just sitting there vacant. So they move in. 3 Italians and 1 Iranian climber move into our 3-person tent. Now Mario, the guy who's left Stefano behind, has also left his sleeping bag somewhere up in the mountain because he's too lazy to carry it. But inside this tent is a sleeping bag. He climbs into the sleeping bag. They take out our stove and they cook our food. They eat our food. At 8 o'clock at night, the man with a broken leg crawls to the edge of the tent. He unzippers the door, and inside the tent, it's filled with people. There's no room for you in here, Don. This place is crowded. There's no room for you. You have to sleep in the vestibule. Don's like, I'll freeze to death out there. Can I at least have my sleeping bag? And Mario says, yesterday this was your sleeping bag. Tomorrow this will be your sleeping bag, but tonight this is my sleeping bag. And he won't give a man with a broken leg his own sleeping bag. Don has no choice but to sit. He's too weak. He can't fight. He sits inside the vestibule of the tent shivering. Bruce climbs into the Italian tent, scrapes enough snow away so he has a place to lay down, and he lays down for the night. Well, the next morning, we're all alive still. We continue down. We have 8,000 feet of more descending to go. We eventually make it back to base camp. A helicopter comes in. We're able to fly Don out. Finally, when we're past the point of the rescue is over, we have a little bit of time to reflect on what's going on. And all I keep reflecting upon is how selfish some people were up there. Why was it that people were willing to cooperate as long as we were headed towards their goal, but as soon as their goal was met, they all competed again against each other? Like the height of selfishness came out on the summit of this mountain. The Russians, the Koreans, the Portuguese, the Italians, they got their goal met, and then they raced down. They put their personal desires ahead of the group's goals. So I ran over to the Italian tent, and I'll tell you, I was fuming mad. I was too weak to fight, but I was fuming mad. And I ran in there, like, screaming and yelling at him. The Iranian climber hears this argument. He comes up, and he looks at me in his broken English. He's pointing his finger, and he goes, I have a question for you. I'm like, me? Why am I guilty? He goes, I have a question for you. Why was it while everybody else was up there for themselves, why was it that your team was up there for everybody else? And to him, this was a novel idea. I guess this is something that's not taught in leadership classes in Iran, but certainly is taught in our leadership classes. Well, we got to the summit. We were very proud of our accomplishments, but there certainly was a ton to learn from this expedition. Now, I teach leadership. I teach leadership at Wharton, which is one of the top 3 leadership universities or business schools in the country. I teach leadership for the U.S. intelligence agencies. I was with the National Counterterrorism Task Force a year ago. The same group that eventually found out where Osama bin Laden was, we were having this same kind of discussion 1 year ago. Because whether you're at Wharton, whether you're at a Fortune 500 company, in fact, a year ago I was with the group in Wall Street that lost $9 billion because of the subprime loan disaster. Everybody in leadership is starting to ask questions. You know what? The old way of doing things are not getting us the results that we need, right? We've judged ourselves on whether we reached the summit or we made our numbers. I'm sure you share with me the same feeling that just because you made the summit of K2 doesn't mean that you were successful, right? You may have won a battle, but you lost the war. If you sold your soul to get to the top of this mountain, was it worth it? How do you live with yourself knowing that you got there, but you did it by having your partners die? I have led 175 international expeditions. I have never lost a single partner. And maybe at some point, fate will catch up with me. The odds are definitely stacked against me because I climb difficult stuff. But I always put safety first, not the summit. That is clearly not the case in a lot of organizations. Too many organizations chase the bottom line and don't worry about the rest of it. Well, luckily for us, and I think you guys come from the same school of hard knocks that I do, the same set of values, that there's a lot of people out there that are trying to change this. They're recognizing if we go about it the old way, if we just buy more tools or hire more consultants, we will be able to drive results. But is they necessarily going to be the results that we want? Or in a day like today, where you're being told you don't get as much tools, we're not going to give you as much resources. You're going to have to figure out a different way to make the same results happen. In fact, we're going to give you less, but we want more from you. How are we going to be successful? Well, more and more groups right now are recognizing that the killer application is behaviors. If you want to drive results in your organization, you have to change people's behaviors. Now, not everybody's behaviors can be changed. There are some fundamentally screwed up people out there. Our job is never to tie into the same rope as those people. How much does it cost to have an idiot on your team? In what we do, people lose their lives, right, when you have idiots on the teams. In businesses, they generally just lose a lot of money. There are so many beautifully or horrifying statistics out there, depending on your point of view, about the effect of bad behavior on your team. Now remember, you as a leader have been hired to deliver dramatic results. But if you have an idiot on your team, all they're doing is, instead of you delivering dramatic results, they're delivering petty dramas to your team constantly. You can't get the big stuff done because you're messing around with the screwy little stuff. And look how it affects you. If you have an idiot on your team, 87% of your other employees want to change jobs. And who leaves first? Yeah, exactly. They have choice, right? And eventually all that's left is the idiots. This is the conversation that's happening right now in more and more businesses. I have been with over 5,000 CEOs this year alone, and this is what everyone's talking about. I've been, as I told you, in just tons of industries. Google just brought us on to do leadership development work for those guys as well. Everybody's worried about this. How do I get rid of the jerks, and how do I just keep the good people? And really, how do I create the value system that's going to drive my company to success? So they are all asking the same question. How do we do it? When people's lives are on the line, if we fail and people die, we cannot fail. Can we create teams that will be successful time and time again? We can. You know, the odds, again, are against us, but we can do it. How do the best teams in the world do it? With my partners at Wharton, this is the question that we have been exploring for years now. So we've met with tons of mission-critical teams and keep going back to this question. How do the best teams do it? I am not convinced that leadership is art. I am convinced that leadership is science. There has to be a formula. Why is it that good leaders can go into any group and make that group at least a little bit better, right? Because they know some stuff. They might only know it intuitively, but we are past that point. We could know this as fact. What we do know as a fact is that high-performance teams are motivated by the mission. So the mission that your organization has is a huge key to its success. Now, you guys probably went through that period in the 1990s where you wrote these 2-page-long mission statements that nobody can memorize. Throw them in the garbage, right? If it's more than a slogan, it's, 6 or 7 words at most is the maximum amount that you need. But it has to be motivating. And everybody on your team has to be judged by whether or not they are motivated by this mission. If you're motivated by volleyball and you just come to work for a paycheck, get a job in the volleyball industry. We do not need you on our team, right? Look, they're united by their values. So we can't just give lip service to things like core values. They have to be true for us. Okay, and I'm getting the big red flag in the back. This is the foundation that they use. We start with mission. We make sure our core values are aligned to it. And then we work on stuff like goals and strategies. The problem with management is that most people are focused on the bottom here, the tactical level. They go from crisis to crisis instead of focusing on the top stuff, which is leadership stuff. There are 4 values that you need to make sure are part of your organization. The first one is passion. And what do you need to be passionate about? You have to be passionate about the mission. If people put their personal desires ahead of the group's goals, somebody will die. Vision. You, as a leader, have to constantly be crafting and communicating your vision. If people don't know where you're headed, they can't help you get there. And chances are that the people on the closer to the ground know better than you how to get there if you just tell them where you guys need to be going. Partnership. The 2 most important words there, trust and caring. Now, you could sense that in your gut. If you have somebody on your team you can't trust, if somebody's not caring about each other, you have to get rid of those people. And if you are not trustworthy, well, then you need to, go see your parish priest and work on that. Perseverance. Now, you guys know clearly that it is a hard battle that we fight constantly. But the biggest difference between successful teams and unsuccessful teams is their ability to stop and reflect upon what they've been through. If you do not take time out to reflect, you will repeat the same mistake time and time again. Well, let me tell you, the view from the summit of K2 was far greater than the view from the summit of Everest, and I thought the Everest view was spectacular. I wish you all the luck in your climb to the next summit that you have in front of you. I know you guys have stiff winds ahead of you. I am absolutely convinced that you guys can make it. There is a lot of amazing leaders, I'm sure, in this group, and if you just apply some of these basic ideas, especially those 4 values things, your team will be successful. So thank you and good luck.